at what you've done. Your mistakes cost me everything.
Hold on. You're seeing the end of the story. But what you don't know is that this confrontation was 5 years in the making. Let me take you back to where it all started. In Abu Dhabi, where glass towers pierce the sky and billion-dollar deals are sealed with golden handshakes, the most celebrated business merger of 2024 took exactly 8 months to finalize. The partnership lasted 9 hours. By sunrise, the senior partner was dead, the junior partner had vanished, and a $500 million agreement had become the Emirates' most shocking corporate crime scene. But here's what the police didn't know. This wasn't a business dispute. It was a meticulously orchestrated revenge plot that had been set in motion 5 years earlier, and everyone, including the victim, was exactly where they were supposed to be. Welcome to True Crime Anatomy. I'm your host, bringing you the darkest secrets from the Middle East's glittering cities. If you're new here, subscribe now, because today's story will shatter everything you think you know about ambition, betrayal, and the deadly price of success. This case made international headlines, but the real story, the twisted game of corporate warfare that led to murder, has never been told. Until now. Meet Yusuf Al-Mansouri, 45 years old, holding CEO, self-made billionaire by 35, heir to one of the Gulf's oldest trading dynasties. To everyone who knew him, he was the perfect Emirati businessman. Harvard MBA, fluent in 4 languages, respected in boardrooms from London to Singapore. But Yusuf had a secret obsession that would make your blood run cold. In his private office, locked away from prying eyes, he kept detailed files, not about market strategies or expansion plans, but about rivals, specifically about destroying them. For 7 years, Yusuf had been running what he called competitive elimination. He would identify rising entrepreneurs who threatened his empire, systematically expose their weaknesses, and orchestrate their financial collapse. He'd done this to 5 competitors before a victim. Not murder, but something almost worse, complete economic annihilation. His method was always the same. Hire corporate investigators, plant moles in their companies, create shell entities to sabotage their deals, build psychological profiles of their breaking points. Then, when he had gathered enough leverage, he would orchestrate their public destruction, bankruptcies, scandals, investigations that would end careers and reputations forever. But this time, something went wrong. This time, he didn't just want to destroy his target. He wanted to partner with him first. Why? Because Yusuf had evolved from corporate predator to something far more twisted. A man who believed that by absorbing his rivals through partnership and then destroying them from within, he was building an untouchable empire. The merger wasn't proposed by their boards, as everyone believed. Yusuf had orchestrated every single detail, manipulating investors, regulators, and family members into thinking it was a natural business decision. He had spent 5 years setting up this elaborate trap, and our victim had walked straight into it. Or so he thought. Now meet Kareem Hassan, 32 years old, tech entrepreneur, founder of the fastest-growing fintech startup in the Middle East. Brilliant, ambitious, everything a new generation of Gulf businessmen represented. His company had revolutionized digital payments across the region, threatening to disrupt Yusuf's traditional banking investments. But Kareem was carrying a secret that was slowly destroying him from the inside. 5 years ago, his first startup had failed catastrophically, not because of market conditions, but because of corporate sabotage. Investors had mysteriously withdrawn. Key employees had suddenly resigned. Suppliers had terminated contracts overnight. Within 6 months, everything Kareem had built had collapsed, and he had lost not just his company, but his reputation, his savings, and his father's respect. For the past 3 years, Kareem had been receiving anonymous messages, screenshots of internal emails from his failed company, evidence of coordinated attacks against his business, financial records showing payments to his former employees right before they resigned. Messages that simply said, "You never knew who destroyed you." At first, he thought it was a competitor trying to intimidate him. Then he thought it might be a disgruntled former employee seeking revenge. But as the messages became more detailed, more threatening, he realized something chilling. Someone had been documenting his destruction for years, keeping trophies of his failure like a hunter keeps animal heads on the wall. When a merger proposal came from Yusuf's company, Kareem's blood ran cold. Because he had done his own investigation, and he had discovered something that changed everything. Yusuf wasn't just his potential partner. He was the architect of his previous company's destruction. The anonymous messages, the sabotage, the systematic dismantling of his first business. It was all him. And now he wanted to merge companies. But why? What was his endgame? Kareem made a decision that would seal both their fates. He would accept the partnership, but he would be ready. But there's another layer to this twisted story, one that makes it even more heartbreaking. Both companies, these pillars of Emirates business, were drowning in secrets of their own. Yusuf's holding company, despite its impressive portfolio, was built on fraud. Shell companies in offshore jurisdictions, money laundering networks stretching across 5 countries, falsified financial statements that had fooled regulators for years. His real estate investments were purchased with funds traced to sanctioned entities. His banking connections involved bribes to government officials. His entire empire was a house of cards waiting to collapse. This merger wasn't about expansion, it was about survival. Yusuf needed Kareem's legitimate, transparent fintech company to clean his dirty money and provide cover for his criminal operations. Kareem's company was equally compromised, but in a different way. To rebuild after his first failure, Kareem had accepted investment from questionable sources: Central Asian oligarchs with ties to organized crime, Middle Eastern investors connected to sanction-evading networks, venture capital funds that operated as fronts for illicit wealth. His board members weren't just investors. They were criminals using his company to legitimize their fortunes. And they were putting pressure on Kareem to expand operations in ways that would facilitate even more money laundering. So when Yusuf approached with this merger, both sides jumped at the opportunity. Neither fully understood what the other was hiding. Neither asked the right questions. They were both so desperate for their own survival that they handed themselves over to fate. And fate, as we'll see, had something truly horrifying in store. What happens when 2 corporate predators circle each other? When a master manipulator meets someone who's been planning revenge for 5 years? When 2 businessmen enter a partnership not for growth, but for destruction? The answer lies in what happened next. But first, you need to understand the twisted surveillance network that had been operating in the shadows for years, drawing everyone closer to a signing ceremony that would end in blood. 5 years before the merger that would end in murder, Yusuf attended a tech conference in Dubai. It was supposed to be a simple networking event, but it became a night that changed everything. Across the crowded conference hall, he saw Kareem presenting to a room full of investors. The young entrepreneur was confident, articulate, his fintech pitch threatening to disrupt the entire banking sector that Yusuf had spent decades dominating. To Yusuf, Kareem wasn't just a competitor, he was an existential threat. That night, Yusuf went home and created his first file on Kareem Hassan. He told himself it was just competitive intelligence, maybe even genuine business interest. But within weeks, analysis had become obsession, and obsession had become something far more sinister. Through careful investigation, Yusuf discovered vulnerabilities in Kareem's first startup. Inexperienced board members, cash flow problems, suppliers operating on thin margins. In his twisted mind, destroying this young upstart would eliminate future competition and send a message to other ambitious entrepreneurs who might threaten his empire. Instead of competing openly like any normal businessman would, Yusuf made a decision that would ultimately lead to murder. He would systematically dismantle Kareem's company, but do it so carefully that no one would ever trace it back to him. Yusuf hired a corporate intelligence firm, an organization that specialized in what they euphemistically called strategic business solutions. For months, this team infiltrated Kareem's startup, identifying key employees who could be turned, suppliers who could be pressured, investors who could be scared away. But Yusuf didn't stop there. He began a sophisticated sabotage campaign. He created fake companies that would sign contracts with Kareem's startup, then cancel at the last minute, creating cash flow crises. He spread rumors in investor circles about financial irregularities. He paid journalists to write negative articles questioning the company's business model. Most devastatingly, he approached Kareem's key employees through shell recruitment companies, offering them significantly higher salaries to join stealth mode startups that didn't actually exist. When multiple senior team members resigned simultaneously, Kareem's first company began to collapse. The destruction took exactly 9 months. By the end, Kareem had lost everything: his company, his investors' trust, his employees, and his reputation. What he didn't know was that one man had orchestrated every single catastrophic event. Yusuf kept detailed records of the entire operation. He documented every payment to corrupted employees, every fake news article, every manufacturer crisis. In his private files, he had created a comprehensive case study of how he had destroyed a competitor without ever leaving a fingerprint. For Yusuf, this wasn't just business. It was proof of his superiority. He had taken down a threat without anyone suspecting his involvement. And he would do it again and again. What Yusuf didn't know was that Kareem was far more resilient than his previous victims. After the collapse of his first company, Kareem spent 2 years in what he called his reconstruction phase. But it wasn't just about rebuilding a business. It was about understanding what had destroyed the first one. Kareem began noticing patterns. The timing of the employee resignations was too coordinated. The investor withdrawals happened within a 48-hour window. The negative press articles all cited similar anonymous sources. Someone with significant resources and sophisticated capabilities had targeted his company. The breakthrough came when Kareem hired his own investigators, a forensic accounting firm that specialized in corporate fraud. They traced the shell companies back to a network of offshore entities. They identified suspicious payments to his former employees that came from accounts connected to one of Dubai's largest holding companies, Yusuf's company. But Kareem made a calculated decision. Instead of confronting Yusuf or going public, he would gather more evidence. He would rebuild his career, and he would wait for the perfect moment to strike back. When the anonymous messages began arriving 3 years later, Kareem immediately recognized them for what they were. Yusuf was taunting him, believing that Kareem would never discover the truth. Each message was another piece of evidence documenting his own crimes. Kareem started secretly recording every message, preserving metadata, building a legal case that would not only expose Yusuf but destroy him. He contacted Yusuf's previous victims, 5 other entrepreneurs whose companies had mysteriously collapsed. Each had a similar story of systematic sabotage, coordinated attacks, and financial ruin. Together, they had built a devastating picture of a serial corporate predator who had been operating in Dubai's business community for nearly a decade, destroying competitors through illegal methods while maintaining a respectable public image. When Yusuf's company approached with a merger proposal, Kareem understood immediately what was happening. This wasn't a partnership opportunity. It was the final stage of Yusuf's twisted game. He wanted to absorb Kareem's successful new company, then expose it as a fraud, completing his rival's total destruction. But Kareem had a plan of his own. He would accept the merger, but he would use the due diligence process to access Yusuf's internal documents, exposing not just the sabotage campaign, but the massive financial fraud that underpinned his entire empire. What neither Yusuf nor Kareem realized was that their deadly game was being watched by others with their own agendas. Yusuf's board members knew about the fraud that built their company. They had been complicit in creating the offshore networks, facilitating the money laundering, and covering up the illegal activities. But now they were terrified. International regulators were tightening oversight of Gulf financial systems. The merger with Kareem's transparent, technology-based company was their escape plan, a way to legitimize their operations before investigators came knocking. They didn't care about Yusuf's personal vendetta against Kareem. They were using the merger to save themselves from prosecution. Kareem's investors were equally desperate. The Central Asian oligarchs and Middle Eastern wealth funds that had financed his comeback weren't interested in fintech innovation. They needed sophisticated money laundering infrastructure. The merger with Yusuf's established holding company would give them access to banking networks, real estate investments, and international transfer systems they could exploit. They were pressuring Kareem to complete the deal quickly, threatening to withdraw their support if he hesitated. They didn't know about his revenge plan. They didn't care about his personal history with Yusuf. So when both companies announced the merger, the financial press celebrated it as a visionary partnership between traditional Emirates business and cutting-edge technology. Industry analysts praised the strategic fit. Regulators applauded the commitment to innovation. No one saw the truth. This wasn't a merger. It was a battlefield where multiple predators were circling, each believing they were hunting while not realizing they were also prey. The merger planning became a chess match where everyone was lying to everyone else. Yusuf was preparing to expose and destroy Kareem's company. Kareem was building a legal case to prosecute Yusuf for corporate sabotage and fraud. Both boards were desperately trying to use the merger to escape their own criminal liabilities. And somehow, all of these competing agendas were going to collide during one catastrophic signing ceremony that would leave one man dead and Dubai's business elite scrambling to cover up secrets that had been hiding in plain sight for years. What happens when multiple layers of deception collapse simultaneously? When everyone is manipulating everyone else and no one realizes how many games are being played? When a business partnership becomes the ultimate trap, but nobody knows who will be caught in it? The answer lies in the most expensive marina penthouse in Abu Dhabi, where a $500 million merger celebration was about to become a crime scene that would expose the rot at the heart of Gulf business culture. Stay tuned, because what happened next will change how you think about corporate power, hidden crimes, and the price of revenge. The signing ceremony arrived like a perfectly choreographed production. But underneath the polished surface, two enemies were preparing for war. 200 guests filled the ballroom of Abu Dhabi's most exclusive hotel. Board members, investors, government officials, business journalists covering what they believed was the most significant merger in Gulf tech history. Completely unaware, they were witnessing the final act of a 5-year campaign of corporate warfare that would end in murder. Yusuf played his role flawlessly. The visionary CEO, bringing traditional business wisdom to innovative technology, shaking hands with ministers, accepting congratulations with humble smiles, his eyes never leaving his soon-to-be partner. To everyone watching, he appeared confident but gracious, a respected businessman completing his greatest deal. What they couldn't see was the anticipation burning in his chest. Tonight, after the contracts were signed and the celebration reached its peak, he would finally execute the plan he had been perfecting for months. Tonight, he would expose the criminal financing behind Kareem's company and watch his rival's world crumble, this time permanently. Kareem was equally convincing in his performance. He smiled at the right moments, praised the partnership in his speech, played the part of the grateful young entrepreneur learning from an industry titan. His hands trembled slightly as he signed the merger documents, which observers attributed to the enormity of the moment. But the trembling wasn't from nervousness. It was from adrenaline. Hidden in his briefcase was a comprehensive legal dossier. 5 years of documented evidence showing Yusuf's corporate crimes, witness statements from previous victims, forensic accounting reports proving systematic sabotage. Every page of the merger contract he was signing contained deliberate legal language that would later be used to prosecute his partner for fraud. The boards beamed with satisfaction, each believing they had secured their salvation through this union. Yusuf's directors saw legitimate business operations that would shield their money laundering networks. Kareem's investors saw access to banking infrastructure they could exploit for illegal transfers. Neither group suspected that their executives were locked in a deadly personal vendetta that had nothing to do with business strategy. The guests posted endless photos on social media, celebrating the merger as a triumph of Gulf entrepreneurship. Financial journalists wrote glowing articles about collaboration between generations. Government officials praised it as proof of the Emirates' business sophistication. Each carefully staged photograph was masking the psychological warfare happening right in front of them. As the signing concluded and champagne was poured, the two partners shook hands for the cameras. The image would later become infamous, two men smiling for the press while each secretly planned the other's destruction. As midnight approached, the celebration reached its peak. Per tradition, the two partners were escorted to a private suite in the hotel's Marina Tower to finalize remaining documents and toast their partnership in private. Crystal glasses, imported whiskey, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Abu Dhabi's glittering coastline. The door closed behind them, and the performance finally ended. The presidential suite fell silent, except for the distant sound of the city's traffic far below. Yusuf's mask slipped first. The gracious CEO vanished, replaced by something cold and calculating. He walked to his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. "I know what you really are," he said, his voice devoid of the warmth he'd displayed in public. "I know about your criminal investors. I know about the oligarch money. I know about the sanction evasion schemes. I know everything." Kareem's face went pale, exactly as Yusuf had imagined it would. He opened the folder, revealing financial records documenting Kareem's questionable investors, transaction records showing suspicious fund transfers, intelligence reports linking his board members to organized crime. "You thought you could build an empire on dirty money," Yusuf continued, his voice rising with righteous anger. "You thought you could fool regulators, investors, the entire business community. But I've been documenting everything. By tomorrow morning, every regulator in the Gulf will have this evidence. Your company will be shut down. Your investors will be arrested. And you'll be destroyed again." But instead of the breakdown he expected, instead of panic and pleas for mercy, Kareem did something that shattered Yusuf's world. He laughed. "I know," Kareem said simply. "I've known you've been investigating me for months. That's why I let you." Now it was Yusuf's turn to go pale. Kareem reached into his own briefcase and pulled out a much thicker folder. "I know about your corporate sabotage. I know about the shell companies you used to destroy my first business. I know about the 5 other entrepreneurs you targeted before me. I know about your offshore money laundering networks, your falsified financial statements, your bribes to government officials." He spread documents across the marble table. Forensic accounting reports, witness statement from Yusuf's previous victims, bank records showing illegal fund transfers, communications between Yusuf and his corporate intelligence operatives. "You're not the only one who can play games," Kareem continued, his voice growing stronger. "I've been building a criminal case against you for 5 years. I have testimony from every person whose life you destroyed. I have evidence of systematic fraud, corporate sabotage, and money laundering. The merger documents you just signed? They include audit provisions that will give prosecutors access to every file in your company. By tomorrow morning, every law enforcement agency in 3 countries will have this evidence." The psychological battle that followed was unlike anything either of them had anticipated. Yusuf's rage at being outsmarted by the man he'd already destroyed once collided with Kareem's fury at having lost years of his life to someone else's criminal ambition. Neither was who they had pretended to be. The hunter had become the hunted. The victim had become the prosecutor. But Kareem had made one fatal miscalculation. He had assumed that exposing Yusuf would be enough to stop him. He hadn't anticipated the depth of narcissistic rage when a predator realizes he's been trapped by his own prey. When Yusuf understood he had been manipulated by the very entrepreneur he had spent 5 years trying to destroy, that the merger was never about business but about building a legal case against him, something inside him snapped. The argument escalated from psychological to physical. Yusuf's hands found a heavy, crystal whiskey decanter. Kareem tried to defend himself, but he was unprepared for the sudden violence. The struggle was brief and brutal. In his rage of being beaten at his own game, Yusuf committed the one act that would destroy not just Kareem, but himself, both companies, and everyone who had tied their fortunes to this doomed partnership. When the violence ended, the suite was eerily quiet. 2 briefcases lay open on the marble floor, evidence of both their schemes scattered around the room. His sabotage files, Kareem's prosecution dossiers, documents revealing the criminal networks that had funded both empires. Hidden in Kareem's papers, investigators would later find a letter to prosecutors prepared weeks earlier, explaining his entire plan to expose Yusuf's crimes through the merger process. The twisted irony was complete. Both had gotten exactly what they planned for, each other's total destruction. Neither their boards nor their investors would get what they desperately needed. The celebrated merger had become a crime scene, and Abu Dhabi's business elite would be forced to confront the corruption hiding behind their polished facades. As dawn broke over the city's glittering skyline, the most celebrated merger in Gulf business history had become its most shocking murder case. The predator and his prey had destroyed each other, leaving behind only questions that would haunt everyone involved. What happens when the perfect revenge goes perfectly wrong? When Hunter meets Hunter and both refuse to back down. The answer was written in blood on marble floors, and it would change Dubai's business world forever. When Abu Dhabi police entered the presidential suite that morning, they expected to find a typical dispute between business partners that had turned violent. What they discovered instead was evidence of the most elaborate corporate warfare campaign in Gulf business history. The crime scene told a story so complex that even seasoned financial investigators struggled to comprehend its full scope. Both briefcases were still open, revealing documents that exposed criminal networks operating across 3 continents. Yusuf's files contained years of evidence documenting his systematic destruction of rival companies. Police found detailed sabotage plans, payment records to corporate spies, communications with offshore shell companies used to attack competitors. It wasn't just one instance of corporate crime. It was a decade-long campaign of economic terrorism. But equally disturbing were Kareem's documents. His prosecution dossier revealed that he had known about the murder plot for months and had deliberately walked into the trap, believing he could expose Yusuf's crimes through the legal system rather than violence. As investigators dug deeper, they uncovered Yusuf's corporate intelligence network. A man named Hassan, who ran a Dubai-based business consulting firm, broke down under interrogation and confessed to 5 years of systematic corporate sabotage. He was sick, Hassan told investigators, his voice shaking. He would spend months studying these entrepreneurs, learning their vulnerabilities, their fears. Then he would create elaborate plans to destroy them financially. He called it maintaining market discipline, but it was just about power and control. Hassan's confession exposed a network that went far beyond individual sabotage. They had infiltrated dozens of startups across the Gulf, manipulated financial markets, spread false information to damage reputations, and corrupted government officials to deny business licenses. Yusuf was their architect, a man who had turned corporate competition into a systematic campaign of destruction. The investigation exploded both companies' carefully constructed lies. Forensic accountants traced Yusuf's holding company back to a massive money laundering operation. Shell companies in the Cayman Islands, property purchases with sanctioned funds, falsified audit reports that had fooled regulators for years. His board members weren't just negligent. They were active participants in the fraud. Police found evidence of bribery, tax evasion, and systematic corruption stretching back over a decade. Kareem's company was equally compromised. His Central Asian investors were linked to organized crime networks operating across 3 countries. The venture capital funds that had financed his comeback were fronts for money laundering operations. Even Kareem's most trusted board members were criminals using his fintech platform to move illicit funds. The merger that both boards had celebrated as salvation was revealed to be exactly what it was: a collision of 2 criminal enterprises, each hoping to use the other to legitimize their illegal operations. As news of the murder spread, 5 entrepreneurs came forward with stories that made investigators' blood run cold. Rashid, a logistics company founder, described how Yusuf had systematically destroyed his business by corrupting his suppliers and spreading rumors of financial instability. Within 6 months, I lost everything. My company, my reputation, my family's savings. I never knew who was behind it until now. Layla, a tech entrepreneur, told of how Yusuf had infiltrated her startup, stolen her intellectual property, and then launched a competing product that drove her out of business. He didn't just beat me commercially. He made sure I could never raise investment again. My name became toxic in the startup community. 3 other entrepreneurs shared similar stories: systematic sabotage, coordinated attacks, financial ruin. All described the same pattern. Months of mounting problems that seemed like bad luck until it was too late, followed by complete business collapse. What they didn't know was that Yusuf had been documenting everything, keeping detailed records of each company's destruction like trophies. Yusuf was found 3 days later at his family's desert estate outside Abu Dhabi, surrounded by burning documents. He had been attempting to destroy evidence, but investigators recovered enough financial records to build a comprehensive case. His confession was more disturbing than investigators had prepared for. Yusuf showed no remorse for Kareem's death, only anger at being exposed. "I was protecting the business ecosystem," he told investigators, his eyes wild with self-righteous certainty. These young entrepreneurs had no respect for the established order. They threatened everything we had built. "I was maintaining market stability." Police found his personal archives, a comprehensive database documenting every sabotage operation he had conducted over 10 years. He had been planning to expand his network, recruiting other established businessmen to help him discipline emerging competitors. The murder wasn't part of his plan. It was the result of his rage at being outsmarted by someone he had already destroyed once. The investigation revealed that Yusuf had been building towards something much larger than individual corporate attacks. He had been creating a cartel of established Gulf businessmen who would coordinate to suppress innovation and maintain their dominance. The murder had stopped what could have become a systematic conspiracy against the entire region's entrepreneurial ecosystem. As the full scope of the corruption became clear, Abu Dhabi's business elite were forced to confront uncomfortable truths about their own practices. The celebrated merger had become a mirror, reflecting the dark side of Gulf capitalism. The fraud, the manipulation, the networks of corruption that operated behind facades of innovation and progress. The case that began as a simple murder had uncovered systematic corporate crime, money laundering networks, and a culture that had enabled a predator's decade-long campaign of economic terrorism. The consequences would ripple through the Gulf's business community, destroying reputations and forcing a reckoning with practices that had been accepted as normal competition. What happens when a society's business culture is exposed as fundamentally corrupt? When the pursuit of success creates monsters who believe they're protecting the market. The final chapter of this story would force the Emirates to choose between protecting its business reputation and prosecuting the criminals who had built empires on fraud and violence. The trial of Yusuf Al-Mansouri began 8 months after the murder, and from the moment the courtroom doors opened, it was clear this case would shake the Gulf's business world to its foundations. International media descended on Abu Dhabi, drawn by a story that exposed the intersection of corporate power, systematic fraud, and deadly revenge. What they found was a society being forced to confront its own reflection in the most uncomfortable way possible. The prosecution's case was devastating. Evidence revealed not just a murder, but a decade-long campaign of corporate terrorism that had been operating in plain sight, while the business community looked the other way. The courtroom fell silent as prosecutors displayed Yusuf's sabotage files, hundreds of pages documenting systematic destruction of rival companies, detailed psychological profiles of entrepreneurs he had targeted, records of payments made to corporate spies who had infiltrated their businesses. But the most powerful moments came when Yusuf's previous victims took the stand. Rashid, the logistics entrepreneur, testified about losing his life's work after Yusuf's coordinated attack destroyed his supplier relationships. His voice shook as he described, discovering years later that the business collapse he'd blamed on market conditions was actually orchestrated sabotage. "He didn't just destroy my company. He destroyed my belief that hard work and innovation mattered. He made me think I had failed when really I had been targeted by a predator." Layla, the tech founder, spoke about the systematic theft of her intellectual property and the coordinated campaign to blacklist her in the investment community. She described how Yusuf had used his network to spread rumors about her competence, her character, her business practices. "He didn't compete with me. He annihilated me. And he did it so carefully that I never knew who was behind it until he'd already won." 3 other entrepreneurs testified with similar stories. Businesses that mysteriously collapsed despite strong fundamentals, careers that ended despite professional excellence, reputations destroyed by campaigns of rumors and manufactured evidence. Together, their testimony revealed a pattern of predatory behavior that had operated for years while regulators, investors, and business leaders ignored the warning signs. The board's complicity was laid bare for all to see. Evidence showed how Yusuf's directors had knowingly participated in money laundering schemes, approved shell company transactions designed to hide illegal funds, and falsified financial statements that misled investors and regulators. Kareem's investors were equally exposed. Forensic accountants traced their funds back to organized crime networks, sanction-evading schemes, and illegal wealth transfers. The legitimate venture capital that had financed the Gulf's most celebrated fintech company was revealed to be criminal money seeking legitimacy. The Gulf's business elite, many of whom had celebrated the merger at that fatal signing ceremony, were forced to confront their own role in enabling a system that protected predators while punishing innovation. The defense's strategy shocked even seasoned court observers. Yusuf's lawyers argued that their client had been driven to violence by the stress of discovering Kareem's plan to falsely prosecute him. They claimed that aggressive competition had caused a psychological breakdown, making him unable to distinguish between legitimate business strategy and criminal conspiracy. My client was operating in a highly competitive environment where corporate espionage and aggressive tactics are normal, the defense attorney argued. When he discovered that his business partner was actually plotting to destroy him using law enforcement as a weapon, his mind snapped. This was not premeditated murder. It was a tragic accident born of extreme business pressure. The defense even attempted to blame Kareem for his own death, arguing that his decision to build a prosecution case rather than compete openly had provoked Yusuf's violent response. This strategy backfired spectacularly, revealing the depth of corporate corruption that had normalized criminal behavior as aggressive competition. The judge's verdict was swift and decisive. Yusuf was found guilty of first-degree murder, systematic corporate sabotage, fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to obstruct justice. The sentence was 25 years imprisonment without possibility of early release and complete forfeiture of all business assets. But the judge's statement went far beyond simple justice. It was a condemnation of the business culture that had made such crimes possible. This case represents the dangerous extreme of what happens when corporate competition becomes economic warfare, the judge declared. When business success becomes justification for criminal behavior, when market dominance becomes more important than ethical conduct, we create predators who believe they're protecting the economy while actually destroying it from within. The defendant did not commit isolated crimes. He operated a systematic network of corporate terrorism for over a decade, and he did it with the tacit acceptance of a business community that valued success over integrity. This verdict is not just about punishing one individual. It is about declaring that such behavior will no longer be tolerated in our business ecosystem. The ripple effects of the trial transformed Gulf business culture in ways no one had anticipated. Both companies were dissolved, their assets seized to compensate victims and cover legal penalties. Yusuf's board members faced their own criminal charges for fraud and money laundering. Kareem's investors saw their assets frozen as international authorities investigated their criminal networks. But from the ashes of corporate destruction came unexpected reform. Kareem's younger brother, inspired by the courage of the entrepreneurs who had testified, established a foundation to protect startups from predatory business practices. Working with international legal experts, they created early warning systems to identify coordinated sabotage campaigns and provided legal defense for entrepreneurs targeted by established competitors. The Gulf's regulatory agencies were forced to confront massive gaps in their oversight of corporate behavior. New laws were enacted specifically targeting corporate espionage, sabotage, and predatory competition, with severe penalties designed to deter systematic attacks on businesses. Financial regulators implemented enhanced due diligence requirements for corporate mergers, designed to identify money laundering and criminal financing before deals could be completed. The business community faced intense scrutiny about the culture that had enabled a decade of corporate predation. Industry associations clashed with reform advocates, while established businessmen were forced to defend practices that had been accepted as normal competition. Corporate ethics experts used the case to educate the business community about the warning signs of predatory behavior. They explained how aggressive competition could cross into criminality, how corporate intelligence could become corporate espionage, and how business communities could unknowingly enable predators. The case forced the Gulf to ask uncomfortable questions about itself. How many other entrepreneurs had been silently destroyed by established players protecting their dominance? How many boards had participated in fraud while hiding behind corporate structures? How many people had celebrated success built on criminal foundations? What this tragedy revealed was both disturbing and enlightening. It showed how the pursuit of business dominance could become a justification for economic terrorism, how corporate structures could hide systematic criminality, and how the complicity of boards, investors, and business communities in maintaining corrupt practices could enable predators to operate for years. The murder of Kareem Hassan had been a turning point not just for two companies, but for an entire business ecosystem. The Gulf was forced to choose between protecting its business reputation and prosecuting the corruption that had infected its corporate culture. The choice it made would determine whether his death had meaning or whether other entrepreneurs would suffer the same fate. As the courtroom emptied and media attention faded, one question remained. Would the Gulf's business community learn from this tragedy, or would it return to the practices that had enabled such horrors in the first place? The answer would be written in the experiences of the next generation of entrepreneurs, and whether they would be protected or preyed upon by a system finally forced to see itself clearly. The mirror had shattered, and there was no going back to the comfortable fiction that business success was always earned ethically. The only question now was whether the Gulf would use this painful revelation to build something better, or whether it would simply learn to hide its corruption more carefully. If you found this story as shocking as I did, subscribe now, because the next case will expose even darker secrets from the Middle East's glittering cities. Drop a comment telling me what shocked you most about this corporate murder. Was it Yusuf's decade-long predation, Kareem's risky revenge plan, or the systemic corruption that enabled all? I'll see you in the next investigation.